Howdy folks, this is Father Dougal 9000 here, and welcome to another episode of Dougal's Game Finish Chronicles, a series where I talk about the games I've played and beaten as part of the Hardcore Gaming 101 Forums Game Finish Challenge. It's rather odd how some episodes can share similar themes, like how this and episode 31 a couple weeks back both tackle games that are either slow-paced, spooky adventures in the wake of some kind of disaster, or Twitch action games that make even the most high-octane thumb war feel like an episode of Postman Pat. But that's also cool too, as are the games discussed in this episode. And hey, look at that! Actual similarities between games that are more than just the physical elements of the universe that make them up! Today's games were originally logged from the 14th to the 25th of September 2021. I Am Alive for the Xbox 360. I'm genuinely so pleased at how this one turned out. I remember reading about this one way back in the day and how radically it had changed from its original concept and dev team, being a game by Darkworks that had you surviving the immediate fallout of an earthquake, to now being a game by Ubisoft Shanghai where you explore a city almost a year after a series of terrible natural disasters. I was curious to check it out after watching a video by Thor High Heels discussing survival horror games from 2012. Something about the tension-filled climbing and the atmosphere of the whole thing seemed like they could be really cool. And yeah, this is definitely a cool game. I wish there were more climbing segments and less sections of trying to take on groups of enemies with limited resources, but the tension is effectively maintained throughout, and there's just enough items that you can afford to be a little reckless, but not too reckless. There's some optional nooks and crannies to obtain more lives or items, and I really like how some of them encourage you to climb despite it draining even more of your stamina. Aesthetically, it's also very well considered. It uses ideas of the day that could possibly be a bit standard, like desaturated visuals and heavily ambient music, to nail its overall mood in such a memorable way. There's something so desolate about the whole thing that feels very tangible. The only downside is I wish this had a physical version so that you could buy it secondhand and not give Ubisoft any money. I know that it's on the PC, but I think that has some issues, mainly due to that stupid Uplay thing they kept trying to cram in everything. But if there is a way that you can get this, ideally for free and in good working condition, then I definitely recommend it because it is a very, very good game. "3D Afterburner 2" for the Nintendo 3DS. Apropos of now, I decided to grab a bunch of small digital 3DS games through the magic of piracy and see how they fared. For the most part, it's not gone great. I kinda liked Super Mario Bros. 2, but the boss at the end of World 2 is overly tough and finicky, while my attempt to play Outrun for the umpteenth time ended in miserable failure yet again, cementing the fact that I will never understand and enjoy the original Outrun, even when playing the version with the most concessions for time limit and difficulty options. Thankfully, I fared a bit better with Afterburner 2, having beaten it on my first go, with the max amount of lives and lowest difficulty, but you only get 3 credits for the whole thing, so it still checks out. I did play this game without basically cheating. It's a very cool game in terms of the spectacle it offers, both visually and musically, but good grief, is it overwhelming. My thumb was constantly mashing the fire and missile buttons while I was frantically dodging around, to the point where the spots that refill your ammo served as the only breaks for me to crack the cramp out of my fingers before they fell off. I eventually managed a strategy of just weaving back and forth in a semi-circular fashion to avoid the aircraft and missiles, while furiously blasting everything at top speed until they got shot down. Thankfully, the game ended before I ran out of lives, and I think I'm okay leaving it at that. I do appreciate the existence of the new special mode that unlocks afterwards, which features a slowdown time mechanic, dogfighting stages, and even little cutscenes, but it not letting you have any continues makes me not want to go near that right now, or ever, as it turns out, in the nearly 2 years that have passed since I originally did this write-up, so there you go. The Starship Damrey for the Nintendo 3DS. Back in the early 2010s, Level 5 produced the Guild series, which was a collection of experimental games made by numerous developers who usually had a famous game developer at the wheel. So you had folks like Yatsumi Matsuno doing Crimson Shroud, Yute Saito doing Airporter, and Kaz Ayabe doing Attack of the Friday Monsters. Among these was the Starship Damrey, a pretty cool if clunky first-person adventure game where you control a robot and navigate an empty starship as you try to figure out what's been going on. The atmosphere is rather strange, with basically no ambience apart from the mechanical whirring of your wheels whenever you're moving about. But that stark silence combined with the low visibility does create something rather spooky. There's no risk of death, so it's not quite a survival horror game, despite having many of the trappings of more classical Japanese horror games. It's definitely an adventure game at heart, and that does include examining objects a couple of times to make sure you have all the information you need, or noticed something that you have to do in order to progress. This is mostly fine, as the game guides you intuitively enough through the locations you need to go to, but when you're stuck and backtracking, the slow movement can be a pain. This one was actually made by Level 5 themselves, so I felt like it tapped into a bit of the adventure game lineage that came from Level 5 founder Akihiro Hino's experience working at River Hillsoft with games like Dr. Hauser and Overblood. Perhaps there's an element of that, but it's also worth pointing out that the game was designed by Kazuya Asano and Takamaru Ebiko, both of whom had worked at Chunsoft, specifically their Super Famicom horror sound novels like Otogiriso and Kamaitachi no Yoru as writers or planners. So there's a decent bit of history tied to this game, which I was pleasantly surprised to learn. The end result is quite solid, and it even tugged at my heartstrings at one point, so I'd definitely recommend giving it a go through the arcane means of piracy because the eShop is now closed. Bastards. And with that, we've wrapped up another episode of the series. I hope that you enjoyed watching and that you'll tune in for the next video. Thank you so much, and until we meet again, have a wonderful day.